The Portrait of Fear. The Stranger's Visit. It was a dark and stormy night in the small, forgotten village of Hollow's End. The wind howled through the trees, and the rain battered against the windows of the lone artist's studio. Samuel Gray, a middle-aged painter known for his lifelike portraits, was hard at work. His brushstrokes were precise, and his concentration was unwavering. As he worked, the flickering candlelight cast eerie shadows across his latest piece, a nearly completed portrait of a local farmer. A sudden knock on the door broke his focus. Startled, Samuel set his brush down and walked to the door. Upon opening it, he was met with an unusual sight. Standing before him was a tall, gaunt man dressed in an old-fashioned suit. His pale face was framed by long, greasy hair, and in his hand, he clutched a black cane with a silver handle. But what caught Samuel's attention the most was the man's glass eye, which seemed to glint unnaturally in the dim light. "Good evening," the stranger said in a voice that was both smooth and unsettling. "I apologize for the late hour. My name is Victor Raven, and I have come to commission a portrait." The commission. Samuel hesitated. There was something about Victor that made him uneasy, but the promise of payment was tempting. Work had been scarce lately, and he needed the money. He stepped aside and gestured for Victor to enter. As Victor made his way into the studio, he surveyed the room with an appraising eye. "You have quite a talent," he remarked, glancing at the half-finished portrait on the easel. "Thank you," Samuel replied, still feeling a chill from the stranger's presence. "Please, have a seat." Victor sat down and placed his cane across his lap. "I would like a portrait that captures my essence," he said, his glass eye fixed on Samuel. "It must be perfect." "I will do my best," Samuel promised, retrieving a blank canvas and setting up his materials. He began sketching the outline of Victor's face, his hand moving with practiced ease. Yet, the more he worked, the more he felt a creeping sense of dread. The painting begins. As the days passed, Samuel worked tirelessly on the portrait. Victor visited the studio each evening, sitting motionless for hours on end. Despite his unsettling demeanor, he proved to be an ideal subject. His features were sharp and distinctive, and Samuel found it easy to capture his likeness. But as the portrait neared completion, strange things began to happen. Samuel started having vivid nightmares of being chased through dark, labyrinthine corridors. He awoke each morning feeling more and more exhausted, his energy drained by the mysterious dreams. One night, while Victor was posing, Samuel noticed something odd. The glass eye in the portrait seemed to follow him around the room, glinting malevolently. He shook his head, trying to dismiss it as a trick of the light, but the feeling persisted. The unveiling. Finally, the day came when the portrait was finished. Samuel stood back and admired his work. It was, without a doubt, his masterpiece. The likeness was uncanny, and the details were exquisite. But as he looked at Victor's face on the canvas, he felt a deep sense of unease. The eyes, especially the glass one, seemed to bore into his soul. Victor arrived that evening, as usual. He stood in front of the completed portrait and smiled. "You have outdone yourself, Mr. Gray. This is exactly what I wanted." Samuel forced a smile, relieved that his work was appreciated. "I'm glad you like it." Victor reached into his coat and pulled out a heavy, old-fashioned coin purse. "Your payment, as promised." He handed it to Samuel, who felt the weight of the gold coins inside. "Thank you," Samuel said, though his gratitude was tinged with apprehension. The transformation. As Victor prepared to leave, he turned to Samuel with a cryptic smile. "One last thing, Mr. Gray. The portrait is not just a representation of my essence. It is a vessel." Before Samuel could ask what he meant, Victor tapped his cane on the floor, and a wave of cold energy washed over the room. Samuel felt his limbs grow heavy and his skin harden. Panic set in as he realized he couldn't move. He looked down at his hands and saw that they were turning to stone. "No!" He tried to scream, but his voice was lost. His entire body stiffened, his skin transformed into cold, unyielding stone. The last thing he saw was Victor's satisfied smile as darkness claimed him. Aftermath. Days turned into weeks, and Samuel's studio remained eerily quiet. The villagers of Hollow's End began to wonder about his sudden disappearance. Eventually, a few brave souls decided to investigate. They found the studio door unlocked and entered cautiously. Inside, they were greeted by the sight of Samuel's lifelike stone statue, standing in front of the completed portrait of Victor. The villagers were horrified, unable to comprehend what had happened. They decided to leave the studio untouched, a silent monument to the mystery that had befallen their once thriving artist. The legacy. Years passed, and the story of Samuel Gray became a legend in Hollow's End. Some said his spirit haunted the studio, while others believed that Victor Raven was a demon who had stolen Samuel's soul. The portrait of Victor remained on the easel, untouched and undisturbed, its glass eye still glinting ominously. One day, a young artist named Sarah, who had heard the tale of Samuel's fate, decided to visit the abandoned studio. She was drawn to the mystery and wanted to see the legendary portrait for herself. As she stood before the painting, she felt a strange connection to it, as if it were calling out to her. Despite the warnings and the fear that lingered in the village, Sarah couldn't resist the urge to pick up a brush and begin painting. As she worked, she felt a familiar chill in the air, and the sensation of being watched grew stronger. The new beginning. Sarah worked tirelessly, driven by an inexplicable compulsion. She painted a new portrait, one that seemed to merge her own likeness with that of Samuel Gray. The process consumed her, and she found herself losing track of time. One night, as she put the finishing touches on the painting, she heard a knock on the door. Heart pounding. She opened it to find a tall, gaunt man with a glass eye and a cane standing before her. "Good evening," the man said, his voice smooth and unsettling. "I see you have taken up where Mr. Gray left off. My name is Victor Raven, and I have come to commission a portrait." The endless cycle. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine as she realized the gravity of her situation. She was now part of the same cycle that had claimed Samuel. But unlike Samuel, she was prepared. She had heard the stories and knew the risks. Determined to break the curse, she invited Victor inside. As Victor posed, Sarah painted with a sense of purpose. She focused on capturing not just his likeness, but the essence of the curse itself. She worked with a frenzied intensity, each brushstroke an attempt to trap the malevolent spirit within the canvas. Victor watched her with a knowing smile, his glass eye glinting ominously. But Sarah didn't falter. She poured her soul into the painting, hoping to turn the curse against its master. The confrontation. Finally, the portrait was complete. Sarah stood back and wiped the sweat from her brow. Victor rose from his chair and examined the painting. "Impressive," he said. "You have truly captured my essence." Sarah met his gaze, her determination unwavering. "This portrait is not just a likeness. It is a trap." Victor's smile faded, and for the first time, a look of concern crossed his face. "What have you done?" Sarah grabbed the cane and tapped it on the floor, mimicking the gesture Victor had used. A wave of energy erupted from the painting, enveloping Victor. He struggled, but the power of the portrait was too strong. Slowly, his body began to turn to stone, just as Samuel's had. The final battle. As Victor's transformation progressed, Sarah felt the same cold energy trying to consume her. She gripped the cane tightly and focused on the painting. She had to hold on, to complete the trap. Victor's voice grew weaker as his body turned to stone. "You cannot escape the curse," he whispered. "It will claim you, just as it claimed him." Sarah gritted her teeth, fighting the pull of the curse. "I will break this cycle," she vowed. With a final surge of energy, she poured all her strength into the painting. The portrait glowed with a blinding light, and then, with a thunderous crack, it shattered into pieces. The end of the curse. When the light faded, Victor was gone, his stone form reduced to rubble. The studio was silent, and the oppressive energy that had filled the room was lifted. Sarah collapsed to the floor, exhausted but victorious. She had done it. She had broken the curse. The new beginning. Sarah left Hollow's End the next day, leaving the remnants of the studio behind. She knew the village would eventually rebuild and move on from the dark legacy of Victor Raven. As she walked away, she felt a sense of peace. She had not only saved herself but also avenged Samuel and all those who had fallen victim to the curse. The legend of Samuel Gray and Victor Raven would live on, but it would be a tale of triumph and resilience, a reminder that even in the face of darkness, there is always hope. The passing of time. Years turned into decades, and Hollow's End became a bustling town. The story of Samuel Gray and Sarah's bravery was passed down through generations. The studio was rebuilt and turned into a gallery, showcasing the works of local artists. The townspeople honored Samuel and Sarah, and every year, they held a festival celebrating their victory over the curse. It became a symbol of the town's resilience and spirit. The rediscovery. One day, a group of art historians visited the gallery. They were intrigued by the tale of Samuel Gray and the mysterious portrait. As they explored the gallery, they stumbled upon an old, forgotten storage room. Inside, they found a collection of sketches and unfinished paintings. Among them was a small, unfinished portrait that bore a striking resemblance to Victor Raven. It was a chilling reminder of the dark history that once plagued the town. The new threat. As the historians examined the portrait, they felt an unsettling presence. The glass eye in the unfinished painting seemed to glint malevolently, just as it had in Samuel's original portrait. Unbeknownst to them, a new threat was emerging. The curse of Victor Raven was not completely vanquished. It had merely been dormant, waiting for the right moment to reawaken. The awakening. One of the historians, a young woman named Clara, was particularly drawn to the unfinished portrait. She felt a strange connection to it, much like Sarah had. Despite the warnings, she decided to take it home and complete it. As Clara worked on the portrait, she began to experience the same vivid nightmares and feelings of being watched. The glass eye seemed to follow her every move, and she felt a growing sense of dread. The return of Victor. One night, as Clara put the finishing touches on the portrait, she heard a knock on her door. Heart pounding, she opened it to find a tall, gaunt man with a glass eye and a cane standing before her. "Good evening," the man said, his voice smooth and unsettling. "I see you have taken an interest in my portrait. My name is Victor Raven, and I have come to reclaim what is mine." The final showdown. Clara realized too late the gravity of her situation. She was now part of the same cycle that had claimed Samuel and nearly claimed Sarah. Determined to break the curse once and for all, she faced Victor with unwavering resolve. Victor smiled, his glass eye glinting ominously. "You cannot escape the curse," he said. But Clara was prepared. She had studied the stories of Samuel and Sarah and knew what needed to be done. She picked up the cane and tapped it on the floor, channeling all her energy into the portrait. A wave of cold energy erupted from the painting, enveloping Victor. He struggled, but Clara held her ground, pouring every ounce of her strength into the trap. The dawn of a new era. With a final surge of energy, the portrait glowed with a blinding light, and then, with a thunderous crack, it shattered into pieces. Victor was gone, his stone form reduced to rubble. Clara collapsed to the floor, exhausted but victorious. She had done it. She had broken the curse once and for all. As dawn broke over Hollow's End, Clara emerged from her home, the remnants of the portrait behind her. The town was safe, and the legacy of Samuel Gray and Sarah was finally at peace. The story of the portrait of fear became a legend of triumph and resilience, a reminder that even in the face of darkness, there is always hope. And so, the cycle was broken, and Hollow's End entered a new era of peace and prosperity.
Dear viewers, if you like to watch the scariest horror stories, do subscribe, like and share our channel. Thank you.